You're listening to The Voice of Russia. I'm Brendan Cole. Today we're talking about the sexual exploitation of children in the UK. Joining me in The Voice of Russia's London studio to discuss this is Fiaz Morgal. He's the founder and director of the group Faith Matters. Wendy Shepherd from Barnardo's. Tommy Robinson from the English Defence League. And Roger Griffin from Oxford Brookes University. Roger Griffin, I'm just going to turn to you. Give me a flavour of what similar sort of cases have happened like this across Europe, and what kind of impact have they had on their societies?
Obviously, what alarms me is the fact that though historically lots of people are worried about the rise of fascism, the rise of Islamophobia and the obsession with national identity as if there's a single pure national identity is a phenomenon which is now the most powerful enemy of liberal values, and these people are not fascists and they're not Nazis, but they do have a very deep concern about national identity. And can I just say, as a liberal, there are three issues where I think Tommy Robinson is onto something, but it's the way he goes about addressing them that I have big problems with. And the three issues I'd like to stress is, A, there are huge issues about identity in Europe. Obviously, what Breivik did about it by trying to start an anti-Muslim crusade was absolutely abhorrent. But there are issues about identity and the type of Europe that is developing from due to mass immigration and the rise of multi-faith communities in Europe. And in the case in Rochdale, can I point out that The Guardian itself published an article in which it quoted statistics from the CEOP, the Child Exploitation Online Protection Centre, which said that of the 2,000 cases of grooming that they are investigating, 46% of those did involve Pakistani Asians or Muslims. I think Asian is a very strange term, but only 7% of Pakistani Asians are in the country. So there is a massive over-representation of Pakistani males involved in gang grooming. Now, the inference from that for me is not that there's a massive problem in Islam or in being a Muslim, but there is something about Pakistani culture and society in respect of how a very small percentage of its males feel legitimate in grooming sex slaves, which I think has to be addressed quite specifically. And the third point I'd like to throw in is the fact that it is absolutely true that in country after country, some attempts by the police and social services to involve themselves in investigating crimes or malpractice in ethnic communities is inhibited by political correctness.
Fiaz Morgal, what do you make of that? It's political correctness. These are issues that people are handling with kid gloves, and this is to the detriment of the welfare of children.
I mean, I think political correctness really is not the big factor here. I mean, the big factor here, specifically if we're looking at issues of grooming that have taken place, are about getting communities to understand that the responsibility for other people also rests with them. Communities need to realize it's not them and us mentality. This is not about the Pakistani community protecting itself. It should never be. And those kind of messages also need to go into the Pakistani community. The person across the road who's your neighbor, who's a white neighbor, equally should have your respect, and their dignity need to be protected. That's the kind of messaging that we need to get across in our communities. That's the kind of messaging we as an organization try to do. But I think just to kind of sum up, this is about all of us, I think in many instances, trying to take responsibility, and particularly within the Pakistani community, a red line that actually other people do matter, and that other people and their rights also do matter.
Tommy Robinson from the English Defence League. Some could say that actually the more closed society, I guess religions that have a degree of sexual taboos may have more problems with dealing with sexual abuse. The child sexual abuse case in the Catholic Church in Ireland is a clear example of that. Got nothing to do with Islam, hasn't it?
What I'm hearing a lot of is from Muslims seems to be victim blaming, because girls are out on the street drinking late at night. A girl should be able to walk down the street naked at 12 years old without getting raped or groomed and abused. And
I think everyone agrees with that, though, to be fair, Tommy Robinson. Nobody agrees that they're fair game.
So that's what I hear. But in Rochdale, a local Muslim counsellor went to the court trial and defended those men. Now they've been convicted of paedophilia. There's been no apology for him defending them. There's been no resignation. There's been no public outcry by the local Muslim community for him to leave his position of power. And when we talk about Islamophobia, which he needs to do ASAP, we're demonstrating there in 3-4 weeks, but when you say Islamophobia, a phobia is an irrational thought. Now, it is quite rational when we see these paedophilic gangs. It's quite rational when we see terrorism, extremism, Islamism, female genital mutation. When we see these fearful things, it's quite rational to condemn them and go against them. It's not irrational. It's not a phobia. It's quite rational to speak up against these practices. And we can't blame it on the Pakistani community, because when you go to Sweden, these same similar cases are happening within the Iraqi community. In America, you've got 29 Somalians just arrested. The link between all these groups, in France, there's cases of Algerians. The link between all of them is Islam. And I'm merely pointing them out. I don't hate Muslims. I actually quite like a lot of Muslims I've grown up with in Luton, but there is a problem embedded in their ideology which promotes hatred against non-Muslims. It promotes sexual slavery against non-Muslims.
A key issue about this is I guess, the wider issue is this an indictment on society? And Wendy Shepherd from Bernardo's, what does this say about British society?
There's a whole raft of issues here, and it's clear from that particular case that, you know, police should have acted quicker, social services should have been in there quicker. Has been a general complacency about children who've been sexually exploited. I've worked in this area for 20 years, 12 years specifically on exploitation. It took the racial issue to put it on the front page of the Times. That's what I object to. I object to the fact that children who were exploited for many years were ignored until somebody could say, oh, it's this particular group that are doing it. It's not about that particular group. This has happened to children for centuries. And what we're seeing now is it coming to the fore much more clearly. I remember and lived through the child abuse scandal in Cleveland that had nothing to do with other than white British families. And that essentially, for me, quietened down society on sexual abuse. The fact that there was a trial about, and the fact that it was called a scandal, actually rendered people helpless in dealing with sexual abuse and sexual exploitation, and made paediatricians fearful to even examine. And this, I think, is another way that we silence, in secret, the abuse of children, and we keep it there by taking it off those children and putting it on to a section of society to blame. The fact is, children are at risk of sexual abuse and sexual exploitation in this country, as they are in many others, and we need to deal with it, and we need to take the bull by the horns and not be frightened to say this is wrong in whichever community it's happening with, and to absolutely put everything possible in to prevent it and to safeguard children. And that's where this lies. Every professional, every community member, every person that exists needs to be making a stand about protection.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia with me, Brendan Cole. Fiaz Mughal, is this an issue that a group like yours has to deal with in terms of integration? Or
I mean, I think there are numerous factors affecting Pakistani and other migrant communities today. I mean, whether it's lack of employment, whether it's internal conservatism, there's a whole range of issues affecting them. That's no excuse for what's happened to these young girls. However, saying that, within the work we do, we also make it very clear that if there are underlying problems around child protection, that institutions need to be able to be developed, to be robust, to pick up those issues. So that's part of the work we do. And that's why I completely agree with the speaker from Bernardo's. This is an issue that affects us all, but we need to strengthen and make more robust those institutions within migrant and communities like the Pakistani community. So the answer is yes, we will continue to do that work and strengthen those institutions to protect the innocent and the vulnerable. I'll just come back to two things Tommy said. I want to go back to the two things that Tommy said. Tommy's talked about FGM, terrorism. He talks about everything that's a problem with Islam, frankly. I mean, and, you know, within the Quranic text, it's very clear. Anti-terrorism statements very clear in there. FGM, not even mentioned. These are clearly cultural things. Talks about Iraqi communities having problems and doesn't talk about issues of migration and identity, which the speaker from Oxford Brookes has mentioned. So again, it's all about blaming Islam. He then says, I don't hate Islam. We run a project called the Tell Mama Project, which is around measuring anti-Muslim attacks. And we can tell you we have statistics, which we are going to present to the Home Office, showing that nearly 20% of the cases that come in, which are anti-Muslim attacks, have some form of an EDL member or EDL link, because we have them snapshotted. We have that evidence with us. So when he comes on here and says, you know, the EDL, I don't hate Islam, there is statistical evidence which shows that his members are conducting those attacks. An EDL demonstration, 3rd of September 2010. Every single Muslim watching this on YouTube, on 7/7, you got away with killing and maiming British citizens, you got away with it. You had better understand that we've built a network from one end of this country to the other, and we will not tolerate it, and the Islamic community will feel the full force of the EDL. So, Tommy, when you come on air and you say, I don't hate Islam, well, actually, you know, you double standards, double speak, and I'm afraid all of the evidence I've got right in front of me shows that you actually do not like Muslims. This is not a case of Muslims. This is a case of individuals who are grooming young girls, and we all need to bust these kind of gangs.
Tommy Robinson from the English Defence League, you're clearly using this sexual abuse case to strengthen your case against Islam, is that right?
Do you really think we want to be talking about this? Do you really think we're using it for anything? These cases have been getting arrests have been made in the last 3 years since we formed, because we're standing in city centres with families telling you these girls are being abused, these girls are being raped. There's been a conspiracy of silence to facilitate it by Islamic leaders, by police leaders. No one's done anything about it for 20, 30 years. Everyone's known this going on. And when your man says, that comment I made when I gave that speech, I try to differentiate Muslims to Islam. I have a problem with 7th century Islam. I think Sufis are brilliant. They are working in Britain. They are such a great sect of Islam. We don't have a problem with it. We have a problem with these Wahhabi, Saudi-funded sects, Salafis, these ones who are trying to take it back to the Bandis, these extremist sects of Islam, which are not integrating and they're fostering hatred within all of our communities. That, when I said you'll feel the full force of the English Defence League, we're trying to put a rocket into, not a rocket, but trying to drive into the Islamic community so that they come out and reform themselves. So they realise the only time the Islamic community started dealing with the extremists in Luton was when we run through the streets. That's the only time. That's what they need. So when I'm saying that, I'm trying to bring them forward to fix up and reform their ideology within Britain, which is clearly not working. Clearly, the rise across Europe of anti-Islamist political parties in every single country are gaining power. The reason why is because Islam's not working.
Professor Roger Griffin from Oxford Brookes University, what do you make of that?
Well, no, can I just say to Tommy, well, look, it seems to me that we all agree here. We all hate Islamism. We all hate Islamist extremism. We all hate abuse of minors. Why don't we all work together to defend a real England, the real England that exists, from all the abuses that are committed by all communities and all types of groups, whatever their ethnicity or gender, so that we all work together to pour all the passion you've got for England into making England a better place for everybody. The language you used on that YouTube, which has just been quoted, is extremely misleading, because it could very easily be heard as a general statement of hatred of Islam. And you've just made it quite specific that it wasn't meant like that. But I think we all need to stop using street protest as a way of moving things forward and actually work together to make England a beautiful, wonderful place where citizens and children and the vulnerable can live in safety.
Fiaz Mughal, what do you think? What is the legacy of this particular Rochdale case, and how do you think it's changed the way we look at race relations and with regard to sexual abuse?
Well, legacy is basically we need a strengthening of institutions. It doesn't matter whether they're civil society institutions or statutory institutions, to protect the vulnerable in our communities, particularly in this instance vulnerable girls. We need to strengthen those institutions. We also need to say there's a clear red line in communities. It doesn't matter whether you're white, you're black, as I said, Asian, whatever. There's a red line. And that red line means if you are involved in this kind of activity, the community itself should be able to inform the police and you will get busted. It's simple as that. We need to draw those red lines.
And just finally, Wendy Shepherd from Barnardo's, what do you think the legacy of this case, this Rochdale case in particular, will be for what you're doing in trying to combat child sex exploitation?
I think for me it's at least raised the bar in terms of that this exists. Children are being exploited, and we need to work, as has been said, with our communities in making sure that this is combated and work together to have a sexual exploitation, sexual abuse-free society. And the way we'll do that is by working with each other, not against each other.
I'd like to end now by thanking all my guests for joining me, Brendan Cole on The Voice of Russia in London. You can stay tuned for the headlines.